Next up on the way of the Renaissance man, the importance of a pivotal person, the virtue of listening, and the science of economic freedom. Welcome to the Way of the Renaissance Man podcast. This is a show about ideas, personal empowerment, and celebrating the rational life. Our goal is to help each other discover the tools needed to better focus our minds, integrate our thoughts with actions, and live the lives we really want. I'm your host, Jim Woods. Welcome to Season 2 of the Way of the Renaissance Man podcast. Our first season was a big success, and I want to thank all of you for listening and spreading the word about the show. If you like this podcast, I encourage you to tell your friends about it and to follow us on social media. Also, feel free to tag, post, and link about the show, as that's a great way to spread the word virtually throughout the entire world. Now, this season, I will continue speaking with many more interesting Renaissance men, and yes, women, who can help us identify, understand, and assimilate the key ingredients essential to constructing a life well lived. Today's guest is my friend, longtime business associate, and financial expert, Doug Fabian. Doug and I worked together for more than 15 years, first on his investment advisory newsletters, and then with his money management firm. Doug is currently a vice president at Mercer Advisors, which has been widely recognized as one of the top registered investment advisors in the country. Now, as you'll discover in today's episode, Doug also is the host of the podcast that I highly recommend called The Science of Economic Freedom. I really enjoyed reminiscing with Doug about our mutual past, but more importantly, I'm excited to share with you our conversation, which includes the importance of active listening, a commitment to lifelong learning, what books we're currently reading, and details about his new podcast and why it can help everyone achieve economic freedom. Here's my conversation with Doug Fabian. So let me just set the table here for the audience. You and I have known each other, I believe I met you in October of 2003, and we started working together a couple of weeks after that. Now, you had the Successful Investing newsletter and your newsletter businesses, and I was, in my background as a financial writer, I had come to you and you were looking for someone to help you with the newsletters. We met, we hit it off. I began working with you. I remember that first week I got thrown into the fire, basically just here's your Friday hotline. Let's see what you can do, And I guess I passed the test because we've been working together for 15 years now. So do you remember that?
I was just going back over the dates of 2003 and where I was at. I started my radio career in 1999, so I had been doing radio for a while. We had those great offices in downtown Huntington Beach, 3 blocks from the pier, second floor. Those were awesome offices that we were in. And yes, I do remember that period of time. I was thinking about the markets too, what was going on. 2003 was the beginning of a new bull market in equities. That was one of the things that was going on. So, that's what comes back into my mind.
Yeah, when I recall meeting you, and I was nervous because it was a job interview. And we went and got some Starbucks. I remember that. And I spent a lot of money at that Starbucks over the years that we were working at that most excellent office downtown Huntington. But yeah, I remember that, and we just kind of sat and talked for a while, and I went home and I told my wife, I said, I think I'm going to get this job, but I'm not 100% sure. This guy's not the easiest guy to read in the world, but I liked him. We hit it off, So, well, the rest is history. We we did our thing together, and I think when I look back on not just our meeting, but our subsequent working together, I think of it in a wider context of kind of the fate that a person kind of has in their life. Like, there's a lot of people that come into your life, both personally and professionally, and some come and go and don't make as much of an impact as others. Of course, it's just the nature of things. but some people really make a big impact in your life, not just maybe in an instructional sense, but just in an opportunity sense. And for me, meeting you was like the catalyst for a huge set of continuous opportunities, and most of which, at least, I was able to take advantage of pretty well. And I attribute that to, taking advantage of anything that came my way and the opportunities that came my way as a result of us working together. And some of them didn't really even have anything to do with you or me per se. It was just the way circumstance was. But one of the reasons I was able to take advantage of these opportunities, at least in my opinion, is because I always thought of myself as being able to prepare properly for the job at hand. So if you handed me a writing assignment or a research assignment or some kind of a deadline, I always made sure that I delivered it as best I could on time and as clean as possible. And I think it's doing those little things on a daily basis rather than trying to have this grand plan that I think, mattered most to my success. And I mean, I guess what I'm going to ask you now is, what do you think was the characteristics that I possessed that, that kind of allowed us to work so well together and allowed us all to grow as together as business partners?
Well, one of the things that, we did right off the bat is, you were writing for me, and you would take my words, because the best way that I communicate is actually verbally. This is why I love radio. This is why I enjoy my own podcast. This is why I'm called a good presenter, because I can communicate very well verbally. A lot of people can't do that. I'm not as good of a writer, and that's one of the reasons why I surrounded myself with good writers and editors, to be able to help with all of the content that I wanted to get out there. And of course, you fit that bill. You had the credentials to be able to do that right from the start, but you also were a very good listener, and you also took feedback from me if we needed to make some adjustments. So all of those things, working together, I was just able to give you more and more responsibility over time, and we just became a good team, and we had each other's back, and we kept moving forward, and I knew what your goals were, and you knew the direction I was going. So it just formulated a good partnership as we moved through time.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great way to put it, because I think in any working relationship, I get a lot of questions. People say, like, well, what are some of the things that you do in business to be successful? What are some of the things you recommend people do? And you mentioned one thing right there, and it's listen. Listening is a subtle art, but it's one of the most important things that people continually fail to do when they're trying to when they're trying to climb up the business ladder, or when they're trying to achieve success. Whether it's listening to the feedback of your customers, or whether it's listening to your colleagues, or whether it's just listening to that inner voice inside telling you, like, hey, maybe you're doing a little something wrong here. It's one of the subtle arts that I think people need to really focus on. If you want to be a kind of a well-rounded Renaissance man per se, to me, listening is one of the most important things. And what's your take on that?
Well, as you were talking about it, it reminded me of the voice training that I've had, because my voice coach, when I first got into radio, I was always presenting in front of crowds, but radio is a completely different medium, because you don't have an audience to gather energy from. And so when I first started radio, I failed at it. I wasn't doing well at it at all. I wasn't able to connect with the audience, and I went out and got a voice coach. And one of the most important lessons that the voice coach taught me was to speak at a pace where you are able to listen to yourself. And one of the things is I'm now in my career, we have a lot of advisors at Mercer Advisors, and I am tasked with training people on how to present. One of the things that I encourage presenters to do is to record themselves and listen to their air check and what they sound like. Now, you and I do this all the time because we're in this business. You listen to your podcast. I listen to my podcast. I listen to my recordings with a careful ear towards how I'm sounding and how I'm putting my words together and where I'm making mistakes. People need to be mindful of their words. Sometimes words can get you into trouble. One of the first lessons I learned from my dad, he said, if you ever get pulled over by a police officer, and no matter what the circumstances are, and let's just say that you get pulled over and you weren't even doing anything wrong, he told me, it's yes, sir, no, sir, thank you, sir. You don't get into any arguments with that police officer because even if you weren't wrong, there was another time that you were speeding and you didn't get a ticket and you should have. So just take it and end that conversation graciously. And so I believe that one of the things, because here we are on your podcast and talking about being better in our lives, people need to be more mindful of their words. And the way that you're more mindful of your words is you get into the practice while you're having conversations, and I'm doing it right now, is I'm actually listening to the words that I am saying to you, as opposed to just spewing out a bunch of words and really not remembering what I said. So listening is really important in two-way conversations, but it's also important to be listening to yourself when you're speaking. This is where if you get too much English on your conversations, and my wife is really good at reminding me when I'm getting a little too much English on my conversation. If I'm getting too loud or I'm too edgy or, especially with, I've got the twin little girls, I've got twin 6-year-old girls. I'm a big guy. I got a big voice. I need to be mindful of how I'm talking to them. Really be mindful of your speech and be listening to how you're coming off to others because, people are making judgments all the time. And that's how you become better.
Well, this society is getting more and more like this. But think of whenever you're doing anything, you want to think of yourself as having a camera on you. Because would you want to be watching that movie of yourself acting in a certain way and not be at least not be embarrassed by what you're doing or how you're acting or how you're speaking? A lot of people, I think, aren't really even concerned with that sometimes. And sometimes it's the more successful people that are less concerned about that. But I know if the idea of like everyone judging you at all times, that is not a bad thing we're not talking about moral judgment here, but we're just talking about a human being has lightning fast assessments that they make on other human beings. And it's the way you speak, the way your eyes dart from one person to another, the way you hold yourself, the way you carry, the way you just your normal comportments. All these things are little subtle signals that you're giving out to the rest of the world saying, I'm either competent in this or I'm incompetent in this, or I'm into this or I'm not into this. And it's sometimes it's not subtle, of course. Sometimes you make it clear that you don't like something, not you, but anyone just in general. We all kind of just make sure that we let people know when we don't want things or when we don't like things. But we also do that subtly. And the more you're able to kind of be mindful of the way you come across, the way you speak, the way you interact with the world, the better off you're going to be. Now, one of the things I think, now you mentioned the actual mindfulness. One of the things that I've been doing in the last year and a half or so that I've found real helpful is actually mindfulness meditation of sorts. And it's just basically like kind of concentrating on being aware of your thoughts as they come in and not letting them dominate your overall sensibility. Do you ever do anything like that? Do you ever do any kind of meditation practice, or do you have any, what's your like kind of way of making sure you're mindful?
Well, one of the things that I'm doing right now, and has to do with a book I'm reading. Actually, I'm reading Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, which is just connected with me very much so. There's been a couple of phrases that he has and he uses that are connecting with me. About one of the things that he mentions as a rule is just try to be better today than you were yesterday. And one of the things that I do on a personal basis is I usually do my workouts, whether it's some sort of cardio or swimming, because I was a competitive swimmer. I do that in the mornings, and that's also that time. I get up very early. I get up at 4 a.m. every day, so I have some quiet time before the little girls are up, and I'm able to have that time to myself. And I listen to a lot of audio, to listen to a lot of podcasts, and just giving myself some time to think. That's also pool time when I'm doing laps in the pool. It's easy. I don't have to think. A lot of times people who are not swimmers have to think about when they get to one end of the pool and they got to touch the wall. And, I'm able to just swim almost mindlessly in a pool because I can do flip turns and I have enough upper body strength to continually swim, so I can let my mind work on the issues that I have. May that be a podcast or something that I'm working on from a business perspective. So that's my way of setting aside some time for myself. And I think that podcasts and new media in general, YouTube, is just a fabulous way to be able to explore new things, to get new ideas, to be able to listen to things over and over again, to listen to long-form programming. And that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed with Jordan Peterson, is he's had a lot of long-form interviews and presentations that he's made as a professor. And it's not a soundbite like television is, but they are discussions that are 45 or 90 minutes in length that are very deep, so you can really think about these things in more detail.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It brings up a few different points. One of the things that I find really interesting about you, and one of the reasons why we become good friends, you always were a reader. When I went into your office the first time, I saw books on philosophy. I saw books on business. I saw books on the economy. I saw books on art, and I was impressed because your bookshelf looked similar to my bookshelf. And I said, this guy knows about more than just, the technical workings of how to buy and sell mutual funds or whatnot. So I don't know if I ever told you that before, but you had that beautiful office. And whenever I went in there, I'd see a lot of various kind of Renaissance man type bookshelf appearances. And I was very impressed by that. And you've carried it on, and we both are people who read a lot, and now because of the nature of our worlds as busy people and not having as much time, we have families, we have commitments, we don't have as much time to read probably as we once did, but we do have time to listen to things. We're in our cars. We both live in Southern California. You're always in your car in Southern California, whether it's to just to do a simple task is an hour-long proposition sometimes, and you can get a lot of content digested in that time frame if you listen to podcasts, if you listen to audio books. And now I assume that are you listening to Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules?
No, I'm reading 12 Rules, which is a good exercise, and I would encourage everyone to work into their routine that continuation of reading. And thank you for mentioning that, Jim. You'd never really said anything to me about my book collection. I have a first edition copy of Think and Grow Rich. As I mentioned on a podcast I just recorded today, I've read that book 10 times. I just think it's important to go back to things that are relevant. I've got a lot of books that I use for reference purposes, But with Jordan Peterson's work, I wanted to give him the respect of reading that book. There's a lot of summaries of it out there. He talks a lot about the lessons on YouTube, but I wanted to read it and absorb it in that sense, to mark it up. Because there are things that I'm learning with every chapter. Some stuff applies to me, some stuff doesn't. But I'm fascinated by the way he put that book together, and so it's been a joy to read. And what I've been watching on YouTube or listening to him on other podcasts, he's on Joe Rogan's podcast, which I respect a lot. He's been on Jocko's podcast. I just enjoy listening to him explain the same thing differently, as he is so good at doing. So that's how I've been going about consuming his work.
That's interesting. He one of the things that I find valuable for him is, no matter what interview you listen to him on, he's never going to give you like a canned answer. Whenever someone asks him a question, you can actually follow this guy's thinking process. He's like working out the answer, and he's working out a proper response that's not just a surface level response. It's a deeper response. And that's one of the tools that I think is valuable in listening to him give responses. And of course, his writing is similar too, because he doesn't just tell you, here's how to do something. He tells you why it's important for you to do that thing. Why is it important for you to, to make sure that you take small steps and try to get better, like a little bit better at a time? Well, because you can't just become a hero without going through the steps necessary to get yourself ready to become a hero. And it's very important for people to do that. There's one book I would like to recommend to you, and if you may have already read it at some point. It's relatively new, but it's called Atomic Habits, and the author is James Clear. Now, he calls it Atomic Habits because he gets down to the very small, like the atom type of improvements, the smallest increments. And so his thing is, you want to get better 1% at a time. You don't want to get better. You're going to, when the habits that you do now are things that you need to change if you want a different result. And the small changes are what result into solutions in the long term. So if you want to lose weight, you don't just say, well, I'm going to lose 20 pounds. That's my goal by the end of the year or something like that. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with having goals. But if you don't take action every day to do something to help you lose that weight, you're not going to have the habits in place to achieve that goal. So the way he says it is, you didn't gain 20 pounds overnight by eating one big meal. You gained 20 pounds over a series of years because you drank a little too much, you ate a little too many desserts, you were a little laxed on the pizza, you had a little too much pizza that you shouldn't have had maybe, you weren't working out enough. So what do? You add a little bit more time to your workout. You pull back a little bit, some calories each day, each meal, eat a little smaller portions, drink a little less wine until you start to see permanent results. I mean, you change your habits, then you change your results. And I found it pretty interesting because a lot of times people try to take on this huge dragon and they're going to conquer it. And I mean, I'm all for that. I've written about that, about kind of embracing the struggle. But you got to do it in small increments. Otherwise, it's never going to happen. And you're going to get frustrated and disappointed. And then what happens if you don't achieve that goal? A goal is something like, okay, well, I've set this goal. And if you do achieve it, well, great, you're a star. Now what? But if you don't achieve the goal, then you're a loser and you just say, screw it, I hate it, rather than just changing those habits every day. And I think that's a powerful thing. So in the two takeaways from this podcast for listeners is 12 Rules for Life, read it, not just listen to it, and James Clear's Atomic Habits, read it, don't just listen to it. They're both, but I mean, I also say that if you only have time to listen to books, that's better than not listening to books. Or podcasts or whatnot.
Awesome. I had not heard of Atomic Habits, and I'm going to put that on my reading list. That's great.
Good.
Thank you, Jim.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about, we talked about my podcast a little bit, and we've talked about your radio life before you went the podcast route. I want to introduce people to your podcast now, your current project, which is just incredibly interesting and probably the best podcast out there in terms of knowing how to deal with your money and with your investments and with your mindset with regard to money. It's called The Science of Economic Freedom, which is just an incredible title that I love immensely. Because I love science, I love economic freedom. And freedom, number one, I love freedom, as my listeners know. So tell me about the podcast. Tell me what your mission is with it. And tell me what people are likely to see when they go to your show and to your website.
Well, the scienceofeconomicfreedom.com. This is a project that I started a little over a year ago. And this is a brand new podcast that is a reflection of the collective wisdom of the company I work for, which is Mercer Wealth Advisors. Mercer Advisors, they are a national wealth management firm. And they acquired my money management company. And one of the things that the CEO asked me to do is he asked me to come in and start a podcast for Mercer Advisors, and that is what the Science of Economic Freedom is all about. It's a podcast that is focused on helping people achieve the goal of financial independence. And one of the things I've been talking about the last couple of weeks on the podcast is just how elite, unfortunately, this group of people who actually achieve economic freedom is. From the research that I have done, less than 5% of Americans actually achieve economic freedom. And economic freedom is not necessarily a specific dollar amount like $5 million of net worth. Economic freedom is the ability to stop work when you want to, or go to work if you want to. It's peace of mind with your money. It's not having to worry about money. You have accumulated enough assets in your life that they are able to generate an income stream to be able to support your lifestyle. So only 5% of Americans actually achieve it. Let me give it to you another way. We have 126 million households because obviously there are 330 million Americans. But in there are children. So and I just got these numbers because I've been researching this now. There's 126 million households based on government statistics in 2017. So that's relatively recent. One of the ways that I have backed into this number we have 11 million households that have a net worth over $1 million. Now, just because you have a household net worth over $1 million does not mean that you have achieved economic freedom. We all realize that $1 million is a lot of money, but if you're spending $200,000 a year, $1 million of net worth is not going to last you very long. So when you divide 11 million into 126 million, the number is 8.3%. So 8.3% of American households have a net worth over $1 million. So now there are some people in America that have achieved economic freedom and they don't have $1 million of net worth. And let me give you an example of that. Someone who has worked for multiple companies or government agencies and they've received a pension. So they might be receiving $200,000 of pension income on an annual basis. And that's going to go on for the rest of their lives. And they don't have to worry about money because that $200,000 a year might come from 3 or 4 sources, but they're able to live their life and not have to worry about money. Now, of course, you could say that, well, what if one of those pensions went away? Yeah, you could say that. But still, that person would be considered to be economically free. So what I've done now is I have discounted the 8% of households with $1 million down to about 5%. From the other research that I have done, that number of Americans who have achieved financial independence falls into that 5% category.
Yeah, that's not very many. That's
the number that's so surprising, Jim. And I'll give you another statistic here I came across today, that 88% of the taxes that are paid in America come from 20% of Americans. So we all know that the tax code is progressive, and the more you make, the more you pay. But 20% of Americans are paying 88% of the taxes. That was kind of a surprising number to me. So I'm just going back to this general facts right now, that financial independence only is achieved by a small group of Americans. And then you have to ask the question, why is that? Why is that? And this goes back to my mission with the Science of Economic Freedom. Many times, people don't know how. They don't know how to go about organizing their finances in a positive way to be accumulating assets, paying down debt, and being disciplined to stay away from all the temptations that are out there in the world. I mean, credit card companies will bury you in debt. Credit card companies start marketing to young Americans who've just graduated from college. Now, again, today, many of them are in debt. But when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I was actually so almost honored that I got another credit card company soliciting me. People really respect my ability to be able to make money. That's kind of what that childish mindset.
Yeah, it's an honor for right. They gave me $5,000 in credit, and they gave me $6,000. Yeah, but what you don't realize is, as soon as you use that, what you don't realize is when you start getting those monthly bills and it starts
bury you into
everything you have. Exactly. Now that's a big problem.
You use the word freedom, and again, this is a quote from Jocko Willink of the Jocko podcast. Discipline equals freedom. Now, many people don't want to hear this, Jim, that discipline equals freedom. But that is the case. When it comes to, losing weight or being in shape, it is discipline that is going to get you to that freedom that you want of a healthy body, healthy lifestyle. Well, the same thing is true when it comes to your finances. Discipline equals freedom. You have to have the discipline to save. People always want to rush into the investing conversation, and I could talk investments, ad nauseum for as long as somebody wants to. But that's not where economic freedom begins. Economic freedom begins with spending, with cash flow. Cash flow is the single most important attribute to the financial health of a family. Their cash flow. Well, what do you mean? Well, if you're spending more than you're making, that's bad cash flow. It doesn't matter the amount that you're making or spending. If you don't have the right ratio, meaning you're spending less than you are making and you're able to put money into different buckets, you have an emergency fund, you have a retirement fund, you have the fund for a down payment on a home, you can be working towards multiple goals at the same time. But if you're not down to that essence of spending less than you're making and staying away from the temptations, I saw a piece from Kevin O'Leary, who's one of the sharks on Shark Tank. And Kevin is a very astute financial guy. He actually started doing some exchange-traded funds, and I know some of these ETFs. But he talks about how a big mistake that people make is buying a car. He's telling Americans to don't buy a car. You don't need a car today with Uber and for not all Americans, for many Americans. And I think he makes a great point.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's funny too, because which is another endorsement for the Atomic Habits book, just because it's fresh. It's my current read at the moment. But one of the things that James Clear says in this book is that you could be a millionaire, but if you're spending more than you take in or that you're making, you have a bad financial habit that's going to end up in a bad situation for you along the way. So a lot of people say, well, I'm making $200,000 a year, or I'm making $300,000. Yeah, but if you're blowing it all on high house payments and boat payments and, Porsche payments, well, we're both guilty of that. But I mean, a man's got to have some vices in life, right? You know, that little German car seems to tug at our hearts a little bit too much now and then. But you know, if that's what you're spending all your money on, you're going to be in trouble, because the key to it is having that good cash flow, that habit of a good cash flow. And I mean, that's a great point that you made, because you know, you and I are both in the investment industry where we get paid to recommend things like Kevin O'Leary's ETFs, I have different stock, as everyone knows, I have, you know, different newsletters that have different stock recommendations, ETF recommendations, bond fund recommendations. When you have clients at Mercer, you're talking about different portfolio allocations, different estate planning techniques, all the different financial nuts and bolts that can help people that have a good nest egg or have money, grow that money and preserve that money. But the key, before you even start worrying about what to do with that, you need to make sure your habits are right, because you're not going to be able to get that money together unless you're somehow get a windfall from from some kind of a family situation or something like that, which is not a common thing. But if you're just a person working hard to try to save money and save for retirement, you need to save money, save for retirement, and you need to defer. You need to have the discipline, as you said, to defer the gratification now for the gratification later in life, so you can have the freedom. And to me, the freedom is the most gratifying thing that I could ever imagine having.
You know, a couple of things come to mind, too, for people who are listening, who are thinking they may be stuck. People don't realize that they can just absolutely rebuild their lives. One of the special reports that I have at the Science of Economic Freedom is the 7 ways to give yourself a raise. And it just goes through some simple steps on how you can cut your expenses. Because there are regards to money. I mean, you can certainly earn more money, and you can spend less money, and you can earn more money on your money. But a lot of times people think that they're stuck. And maybe you need to move. Maybe you need to move to a less expensive state. You and I both live in California, Jim. It's a very expensive state. A lot of people, of course, this worries me long-term about the state of California. A lot of people are just picking up and leaving. My brother moved out of the state of California, moved to Texas, moved to Austin, Texas. He's been there now 10 years, absolutely loves it. And one of the reasons he moved is because of the high cost of living in the state of California. So you can move to another state. And, you know, again, somebody might think that that's radical. Hey, it was, you know, my dad picked up and moved our whole family when I was 3 years old. We were living in Connecticut. My father hated cold weather, and he moved to California because of the Rose Parade. And so, you know, that's just what he decided to do, pack up and leave. So many times people get this mindset that they can't change, but they can. You know, sometimes you just got to make radical change in your life in order to be able to reset your sails and get yourself going down a new course.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The thing with, I think someone needs to, one of the keys, I think, if you're in a position that you feel you need to alter, the first thing to do is to begin with the small things, of course, and to employ that discipline. And then if you need to make a bigger, more radical change, like a move somewhere or changing jobs or changing relationships or whatever that big change might be, you owe it to yourself to do that. You owe it to yourself to look into the fear of the unknown and to say, I'm going to do it anyway. Screw it. I need to do this because I'm not happy with my life. I'm not happy with where I am. I'm not happy with the trajectory of my life. And people, I think, need to project themselves. If I stay in my current situation, what's going to happen in a year? What's going to happen in 5 years? Am I even going to be able to get out of this situation in 5 to 10 years? Maybe not. So I think we only have one trip around this thing, and we must make as much as we can of it, because otherwise, what are we doing?
it goes back to that board game, the game of life. This is a game that we are playing, and there are rules to the game. And, spending less than what you make is one of those rules. It's just amazing how many Americans are not, achieving their level of economic freedom because of bad habits and decisions that they have made. The man's not holding them down. There's a lot of freedom in this country. Everybody in the world is still trying to get to this country because it's the land of opportunity. But many Americans are not trying to apply themselves and break out and start doing new things, get a second job. There was a time in my life when I was just about to graduate from high school, but my dad was 50 years old. I'm, 17. And my parents were basically broke. My dad was working 3 jobs. I was working as a ocean lifeguard in Newport Beach, making really good money, but bringing my paycheck home to help my parents out. Okay? That's just where we were. But 10 years later, my father was a millionaire because of the business that he started. And, of course, the newsletter that you write today that we have been publishing collectively for over 40 years. My mother and father started that newsletter on the dining room table in Huntington Beach, and it caught fire, and it was just wonderful for our family. And again, I'm honored that you're carrying on that tradition of keeping that newsletter going, working with Eagle Publishing. I, of course, let the newsletter go when I went to work for Mercer Advisors because it created some conflicts of having multiple sources of income, and they wanted me focused just on the things that I'm doing for Mercer Advisors. So that's how we got to where we are, and you're doing a great job with the publication, Jim.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Doug. I appreciate that. It means a lot from someone I love and respect. Okay, so I am mindful of your time. I know you have podcast of your own to deal with right now. So I would like you to tell my listeners again how they can go and listen to Science of Economic Freedom, and if there's any closing thoughts that you have that you think people should keep in mind as we call it a day here.
Well, I'm honored to share the message of the Science of Economic Freedom with your audience. There are over 60 podcasts that we have posted at the Science of Economic Freedom website, scienceofeconomicfreedom.com. One of the things that I'm doing right now in the series that I've begun at the beginning of this year, beginning of 2019, I've got the first 6 podcasts that I'm doing on the path to success in 2019 for your finances, no matter where you are. I just did a podcast recorded today, which will be released next week, on goal setting. And I just want people to understand that one of the great things about the financial markets and the system we have here in America is you get to start again. And no matter where your finances are, you can improve them in 2019. So if you would, listen to the Science of Economic Freedom podcast and make it a habit, you will improve your finances this year as we're moving forward. I think there's still tremendous opportunity in the capital markets here in the United States and around the world. People are always worried about stock market too high or something like that. There's always going to be opportunity out there and ways to be able to invest. But first and foremost, you need to get your financial life in order and start saving some money. And we'd love to help you do that with the Science of Economic Freedom podcast.
All right, everyone, go to the Science of Economic Freedom, scienceofeconomicfreedom.com. And I cannot recommend that website high enough, or that podcast high enough. Doug Fabian, it's my honor to know you.
Thank you, Jim. Enjoyed this today.
All right. Thank you.